Welcome to Season 2 of EdLab, a podcast of the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development. I'm your host, Audrey Breen.
For schools to sort of choose the type of curriculum that they're using, the type of professional development that they're using, is some of the most consequential decisions that they make that affects sort of the quality of kids' education. And whatever support that we as a research community can provide to schools in giving them what the evidence suggests about what's effective and not effective in sort of a way that they can use, sort of the most useful we can be in terms of serving.
Welcome back to EdLab. Thank you for joining us today, and a special welcome to those of you who have found us for the first time. Schools are regularly making important decisions that impact the quality of their students' education. Add technology like artificial intelligence that is advancing lightning fast into the mix, and schools are at risk of implementing products that have little evidence of actually working. So how do they get their hands on the evidence they need to make informed decisions? That question is at the heart of the work conducted by education researchers like today's guest, Vivian Wong. A research methodologist, Vivian is an associate professor in our Education Leadership, Foundations, and Policy Department who has conducted a slew of research, partnering with colleagues on studies all across the school. In 2015, her work took on new meaning when one of her children was diagnosed with a learning disability, landing Vivian on both sides of the education research paradigm, navigating the gap between what she knew the research evidence suggested and what she witnessed being implemented in the classroom. Today, Vivian will share why education research is so important and why, with the rapid deployment of all kinds of technology, including AI, now is a critical time for it to continue. Vivian, thank you so much for spending some time with us. I'm thrilled you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be chatting with you today.
Oh, good. Okay. Before we get into some of the details of your research, which I'm very much looking forward to, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up here.
Yeah, so I'm a methodologist. So what that means is that my job is to really think about how we know something is true. And part of that involves figuring out how do we design studies in real world environments that can give us some really usable information on what programs, what type of curriculum actually work in school settings. And that turns out to be a really hard job. Yeah, because
there's a lot happening.
Schools are really complex institutions with teachers, administrators, and students who are often juggling competing demands that do not involve running a research study. Right? So my job is often around sort of figuring out how to solve those problems in real world environments. How do we answer questions rigorously while also working sort of within the constraints of school settings and in complex environments?
Yeah.
And so I trained to be a methodologist, and the bulk of my work is about sort of figuring out statistical methods and estimators and research designs for understanding causal relationships in school settings. And so by sort of the nature of the work that I do, it has always been a little bit abstract and technical.
Yeah.
But over the last several years, when I had kids, this work became much more personal for me. So in 2015, one of my kids was diagnosed with a learning disability. Oh. And suddenly I was on the other side of the research paradigm. So as a parent, I was trying to figure out what types of services my child needed, and then also trying to understand why he was not getting those services in schools and in the classrooms that he was in. And honestly, it was really frustrating and scary to sort of go through that experience, and also to sort of see the lag between what the research evidence say and what's actually being implemented in school settings. So as a result of that, some of my interest has also turned to the intersection, basically, between methodology and policy.
So if something works, and then what happens once we've figured out if it works?
That's right.
Work?
And how can we use policy as a lever to be able to help schools kind of adopt interventions that have some kind of scientific evidence to support, its efficacy or its effectiveness.
So when we look at the landscape, is there a common language that we're using around what works and what doesn't work?
Yeah. So in 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, you may have heard of, was passed. This was the same year that my son was diagnosed with a learning disability. But this was the first time that Congress had passed this law that defined what we count as evidence in education research.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And so basically what ESSA created was 4 tiers of evidence quality, right? At the top is interventions in curriculum and program that have evaluated using strong randomized control trials similar to in medicine, then well-designed quasi-experiments when randomized experiments aren't possible.
Yeah.
The third tier is around sort of correlational results. And then the fourth tier is interventions and programs that have strong theory and a plan to be evaluated.
Got it.
When I talk about this with students, at first it sounds like that's technical jargon, right? But then it does actually have some implications for what gets implemented at the school level, because schools are then required that if they want to spend federal funds, such as Title I funds for school improvement, they have to adopt products and services that have some kind of evidence that meets the evidence tier 1 through 3 that have been defined under ESSA. And so what this means in practice is that it gives sort of decision makers, but also vendors who are often responsible for trying to produce that evidence, as well as evaluators, a common language for how we're thinking about evidence. And it also just provides a nudge towards pushing people into a direction of trying to produce that rigorous evidence.
Right.
So the Department of Education then also created the What Works Clearinghouse. The clearinghouse was actually established in 2002, so it was before the 2015 law. The clearinghouse is basically, the way that we can think about it is like a consumer reports for education research. But then after 2015, where the clearinghouse sort of stepped up its role in terms of trying to provide guidance on the nitty-gritty details of how do you actually understand what evidence tiers are, as well as reviewing the research to define which type of studies meet the evidence tiers and what do not. So, for the last 20 years, we had been moving towards a place where we had a much more sort of standardized understanding of what we think about as being quality evidence, as well as some federal supports for generating rigorous evidence and being able to sort of turn that out for schools to be able to understand what types of products and services have evidence behind them.
Yeah. And the goal there, of course, is schools have precious funds, they have precious time. So we want schools to be using tools that we have evidence that actually that those tools work.
That's exactly right. And schools are also under a lot of pressure and constraints. They have 1,000,001 things to be able to deal with, right? In terms of just managing sort of teachers and kids and classrooms and just sort of the logistics of running schools. So, choose for schools to sort of choose the type of curriculum that they're using, the type of professional development that they're using. That is some of the most consequential decisions that they make that affects sort of the quality of kids' sort of education. And my general thought is that whatever support that we as a research community can provide to schools in giving them what the evidence suggests about what's effective and not effective in sort of a way that they can use, sort of the most useful we can be in terms of serving.
It's going to set them up for success.
Yeah.
So with that background, what are some of the questions you're specifically asking right now in your work?
Yeah. So one of the challenges or one of the things that we're thinking about, right, is that over the last year, as you know, the sort of the landscape in education has potential to have a lot of change, right? Yeah. So there was the defunding of the Department of Education, and in particular, the Institute for Education Sciences, the agency that funds a lot of these types of rigorous causal studies. About 95% of its staff were laid off at the beginning of this year. Also, the contract for the What Works Clearinghouse, which was the registry that helped sort of people kind of navigate what these evidence standards meant and then also evaluated studies, that contract was also canceled this year. And I think what we're seeing now is a move towards, what I think the landscape seems to be is sort of a signaling of a decentralizing and a devolving of decision-making to local levels, where different states and different school entities are going to be responsible for sort of figuring out what works for them and the types of evidence that they're going to want in order to be able to make decisions for their own school districts and for their own kids and teachers. And I think, on the one hand, I think that there's some benefits to that, because I think that could give local entities and states a lot more flexibility in terms of addressing the problems or some of the issues that are coming up with their own sort of populations of teachers and students. On the other hand, what I do worry about is that we've spent 20 years in terms of trying to really sort of build up the capacity as well as the infrastructure for creating a cadre of people who are independent evaluators who can be sort of honest brokers of what types of education products are actually effective and what is not. And I worry that in this kind of decentralized moment that we're going to have 50 different definitions of what counts as evidence. And we're already kind of seeing that in the public health sphere, right? And if we have 50 different types of definitions of what evidence means, then I think what that sort of leaves is it leaves people like me who are parents and you who are also a parent and trying to figure out what's the best thing to do for our kid. I think it could raise real questions about an uncertainty about what to do and trying to be able to provide supports and services for our kiddos. Yeah.
So I know you have mentioned laptops, tablets. There's a lot of tech happening in schools. What do we know about the use of that kind of technology? And does that fall in the we have evidence or we don't have evidence bucket?
Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, in terms of the use of technology, this is another example where I think the technology is racing ahead of the evidence. And so for example, in terms of looking at the rollout and the effectiveness of laptops and tablets in schools, basically what happened was that between 2010 and 2015, there was a really aggressive rollout of one-to-one computing in the United States. So that by 2013 to 14, U.S. schools had purchased over 23 million devices in a single year. And in 2017, in an Ed Week survey, more than half the teachers reported that they were teaching in one-to-one environments, which meant one device per kid.
Wow.
And as we all know, that during the pandemic years, nearly every middle school and high school student had a school-issued device. So adoption of laptops and tablets were lightning fast. And unfortunately, we didn't have much evidence about whether these were good tools to support kids' learning or how they would affect kids' learning at all. Most of the studies that we had were descriptive or qualitative. They were not large causal evaluations. Few of these studies measured adoption in sort of a precise way or in a standardized way, and fewer of these studies tracked the longer term outcomes for kids, which is also important to think about in this context of how sort of technology use might bleed over into other types of outcomes that might be out of school.
Totally.
And so what we do know from this descriptive work was that adoption of these devices didn't necessarily guarantee use, and that schools were not random in their adoption of these devices. So it tended to be urban schools and more high income districts that tended to adopt these devices earlier on.
So I know laptops are not the only technology that has been introduced to schools right now. We are in an environment where there is a lot of talk about generative AI, artificial intelligence. What is happening?
I am not an expert on AI, but what we can see right now is that AI isn't hypothetical.
Right.
It's here. And there is a lot of interest in thinking about how AI can transform teaching and learning. An area I think that parents and school districts should be thinking about when they are looking at the evidence that's often generated by ed tech platforms.
Right.
Their outcomes tend to be focused on engagement around the platform.
Use of the tool.
Yes.
Not what happens after.
How much time does a kid spend on the platform?
Yep.
What is the click rate to the next page, right? It's the same type of engagement outcome that drives YouTube and social media platforms as well, right?
Yeah.
And so you can imagine a world in which engagement with a platform may not be totally consistent or perfectly aligned with how much a kid is learning.
Actually learning,
as well as thinking about potential spillover effects that a kid using AI to learn math in school. What else are they thinking about or learning in terms of AI in other domains of their life? For example, if they go home and using AI for their social life or their social development. And so we just don't know the answer to these questions, but these are really important questions that we should be asking as a research community, as well as school districts and teachers and parents who are thinking about adopting these products into their curriculum.
So what does it look like for a model to have evidence and for those to be utilized by schools?
Yeah. So, I think one of the positive sort of movements that have been made in the last 20 years has been funding of initiatives to be able to evaluate often sort of local homegrown initiatives to improve sort of student learning outcomes. So, for example, in Boston, there is a well-known sort of pre-K kindergarten program that was built around evidence-based curriculum in math and reading, and we had federal sort of initiatives supported from the Institute for Education Sciences and National Science Foundations that had supported rigorous evaluations of these studies that continued also for longer follow-up. And basically, their evaluation showed that there were substantial gains from these pre-kindergarten programs in early math literacy and language skills. And that these programs have sort of served as a model for other cities and states to be able to scale up their pre-kindergarten programs.
That's great.
And we have sort of seen other types of promising programs to, behavioral experiments that sort of send text messages or postcards to reduce absenteeism for kids and families, which became really important during the pandemic.
Right.
So all of these are promising examples of innovations and programs.
Yeah.
That are often developed sort of at the local level, but have the support of federal funding.
Yeah.
That allowed for independent researchers to come in and to evaluate these programs in rigorous ways.
Because we certainly cannot be asking educators or school leaders to be doing that work themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we shouldn't be asking vendors themselves to be necessarily providing or to be sort of the sole providers of that evidence, because they also have incentives to try to sort of sell their products. So this is partly why I think it's really important for us to, continue to think about how do we continue to support education researchers who can remain independent and be sort of honest brokers of what the evidence actually supports for different types of products or curriculum or services. And we really need that now, especially as we could have potentially another deluge of products who are going to be entering our school systems.
Yeah. You certainly are conducting research at the Ed School. You are also a part of the work that we do to prepare teachers, to prepare researchers. How does all this impact that work?
Yeah. So at the School of Education, we're thinking about potentially not only sort of the transformative nature of technology in classrooms, we're thinking about how can we transform evidence generation to be able to inform decision-making in classrooms as well, right? So we have been thinking hard about how do we train students who are interested in making an impact in education or social policy, and using data and using evidence in order to be able to make that impact. So we've got a few programs that we are rolling out that we're pretty excited about. So if your interests are squarely at the intersection between data science or data analytics and policy, in our undergraduate youth and social innovation program, we've launched PADA, the Policy and Data Analysis Concentration. This is basically an opportunity for undergraduates who are in the YSI major to be able to learn more programming skills, to think deeply about the role of AI in education, as well as take a class on data ethics, which is going to continue to be incredibly important as we move forward. So I think this is going to be a concentration that's going to provide students with both technical skills as well as judgment, in order to be able to provide, in order to be able to sort of help with decision making. And then for deeper dive, we still have our master's in quantitative analytics and education and social policy. So this is basically will train you to be an applied data scientist, someone who can design rigorous evaluation studies, analyze large data sets, and then communicate results. Yeah, so I think I'm really excited about this because the theme across these programs is that it's not just about crunching numbers. It's about thinking about how we can use this evidence in ways that matter for improving sort of outcomes for both kids as well as, for human development in general.
Yeah, that is awesome. 2 questions that I have asked on almost all of the podcasts episodes so far. Can you talk about what partnerships mean for your work? It feels like, especially in this work, there are a lot of them. So
Yeah. So I think of partnerships as just really being the engine of the work that I do. And the reason why I think this is because you can't really answer big education questions alone. You can't do it as a single researcher, not as a single company. what you really need you need teachers and districts and funders and researchers who are working together. And for most of us, unless you're related to somebody extremely wealthy or
Right.
somebody special, but for most of us who want to make a meaningful impact in the world, it's going to take some form of collective action. And so one area that I have been really interested in as both sort of an organizational capacity, but also as a methodology, is thinking about sort of the role of team science and how we can use that to be able to organize education research.
Yes.
Team science basically means that instead of one research team organizing a single trial in place, we have multiple teams of researchers who are coordinated to test the same intervention or to run the same sets of observational protocols across multiple schools and across multiple institutions. And part of the reason why I got really into this is because if you look at the samples of data that have been collected over the last 20 years in terms of sort of evaluation studies, one of the things that you'll notice is that the vast majority of samples are taken from very specific places, usually places that are near Research One institutions, right? That are on the East and West Coast, that are in urban areas. And there are logistical reasons for this. There are sort of scientific reasons for this. But one concern is basically that there are schools and there are communities that are underrepresented in these samples.
They're being left out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how do we design a study such that we can ensure that there is representation across sort of the full sort of diversity of schools and populations in which we're interested in learning information about? So team science became sort of an approach that we could start to address that. And I was really excited when I met Bill Therian and Brian Cook, because I will say, two also professors here. Yes, two faculty members at the University of Virginia. And they had been organizing a crowdsourcing platform called the Special Education Research Accelerator. And basically what this crowdsourcing platform does is that it's a network of researchers who are interested in basically collaborating together in order to be able to address questions that are scientifically and have policy importance, but need to be addressed through sort of the cooperation of multiple large teams of people working together. And so they have really been leading that charge in the special education sphere. And that really sort of dovetailed with the methodological work that I was doing with Peter Steiner, because Peter and I had been thinking about, from a statistical perspective, that if you were interested in understanding the effects of a particular intervention, and not only just the average effect across the entire country, but you were interested in understanding that effect, how that effect might vary across different contexts and different populations, how might you design a study in advance that would help you sort of get at that answer?
Yeah, that is awesome. Okay, one last question. If we were having a conversation 10 years from now, what do you hope that we know then that we don't know now?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about what we're doing today, but I think what I would hope for 10 years from now is that we will have the infrastructure where we allow the evidence and education research to lead and not the technology or the products, right? And we are, I think, at a really critical moment for this, where AI and other tools are entering schools very quickly. And the backdrop also matters, right? NAEP test scores have been flat and they've been declining. So I think people are feeling a lot of pressure. How can we use tech to move quickly in trying to sort of address some of these challenges?
Yeah.
And my hope is that we can build the resources and the supports for evidence that can move quickly enough to help students in real schools. And so 10 years from now, what I would like to see is a human-centered research system that really produces faster answers from more representative samples. So that includes schools in urban and rural and well-resourced and under-resourced areas. So that we're not continuing to generalize results from just a handful of convenient sites.
Right.
And I think what that means is adopting some of the best parts of medicine's sort of trial ecosystem for education, where we run sort of coordinated multi-site trials that not only just answer questions about what works on average, but starts to try to also understand for whom and under what conditions and why.
Yeah.
And then I also want to say here that AI and machine learning can be really helpful in this moment, because even though they're not substitutes for judgment, they can be really impactful in accelerating our work. So again, like these tools are going to be really helpful in terms of rapidly cleaning and linking data, flagging promising signals for where we should continue to investigate and evaluate, as well as monitoring implementation of new products and services in real time. So I think AI and machine learning in education research really has an important role. But I think the importance here is that we still continue to center humans and their judgment for what types of questions matter and how do we interpret the results, and use AI as basically the plumbing in some ways to help us sort of more efficiently.
I love that analogy.
Answers. Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you, Vivian, for taking some time today. And I am so blown away by the work that you do. I'm grateful that you do it, and I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much.
EdLab is a production of the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development and WTJU 91.1 FM. EdLab is produced and hosted by Audrey Breen. Our music is Palms Down by Blue Dot Sessions. You can subscribe to EdLab wherever you get your favorite podcasts.